Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I have woken from the dream that is Finnegans Wake by James Joyce, and what a dream it is. An unholy, chaotic mess, a morass of language. Jocund Jack jousts with jealous Joyce, genuflecting at germane jests, while Rambling Raconteur ratiocinates, realizing that Ricorso redeems rigmarole. Sometimes. Because that's a lot of what we get in this book. It's 628 pages, 2 pi, the unit circle, if you will, in radians, and it's something else. I've been reading this throughout December. I started reading it kind of as a way to just clear my mind at the end of really, really hard days at work. And then over the past week and a half, I've been doing 40 to 50 page segments across a day or across an evening. And again, it's really something else. I think there's a way to view Finnegans Wake as just a massive joke. There's a way to view it as a coded encyclopedia. There's a way to view it as this postmodern / modern masterpiece, a way in which Joyce is trying to do what Orwell suggested famously in an essay, which is to say that Orwell noted we have all sorts of concepts that exist in our consciousness, all these aspects of the human mind that we don't actually have words for. And we try to use words or we use images to try and approximate them, but we don't have actual words for them. It sure would be good to be able to know this is what we're actually talking about. And Joyce, I think, in a sense, tries to do that in this book. He has us in a dream, and we're at night. We're in a dream, and in dreams there's no sense of time. That we can be our idealized selves, we can be our worst selves, our nightmare versions of ourselves. We're stripped away from so many of the aspects of our identity that we can become these archetypal aspects of ourselves. And so it's a really interesting book at times, but it's also wild and all over the place. As Orwell also noted when comparing Henry Miller with James Joyce, he noted, Joyce is a kind of poet, but also an elephantine pedant, which is true. But I will say this, as a choose your own adventure, I was enjoying just getting in and reading 10 or 12 pages at a time and recognizing jokes, whether they were linguistic puns, whether they were historical puns, geographical, mathematical. Joyce is everywhere. Historical, the specific history of Ireland and the history of the Catholic Church in Ireland. It's just filled within the book. And there are plenty of jokes. But it can also be a mess. I do want to warn readers that as much as there can be a sense of joy within it, there can also be a bit of a mess. As an example of some of the easier puns, we get things like this on page 142. When they are swordsted, Matty, Teddy, Simon, Jorn, Peter, Andy, Barty, Philly, Jamesy, Moore, and Tom, Matt and Jakes McCarty. Answer the Morpheos. Well, Matty, Teddy, Simon, those are the 12 apostles. Jamesy, Moore, and Tom, James the Greater and Thomas, Matt and Jakes, Matthew, Jakes McCarty is Judas Iscariot, Barty is Bartholomew, Philly is Philip. So we have the 12 apostles in that joke, and that's a fairly simplistic joke. Later on, we have another one. Let's see, here it is. This is page 607. Still gonging restage, Jacob Vander Bethel smoking behind his pipe with Esav of Mesopotamia lentling out his borrowed chafing dish before symbolusing the apostles at every hours of changeover. So there we have Jacob from Bethel, the rock where he sleeps, smoking his pipe, and Esau of Mesopotamia lentling out his borrowed chafing dish, the dish that Esau traded his birthright to Jacob. So we have a lot of religious type jokes, but there are also ones that don't refer specifically to religion. We get ones like Greet Scoot, duckings and thuggery, though he was fucks to fucks, like a bunny boy Roger with all the tea-shop lionesses of Lundrum, hive and hosed up against him, being a lapsus linguo with a rough-a-dub shorter temper, bad cad, dad, fad, sad, mad, nad, vanity bear. So we have Greet Scoot, duckings and thuggery, so Walter Scott, Charles Dickens, William Thackeray. This is on page 177. Hive and host, Ivanhoe, Vanity Bear, Vanity Fair. So we have jokes like that I think are very approachable to readers. But there's also jokes that make almost no sense or that require you to be a polyglot. Thank goodness we're all fluent in 11 languages, right? There are the jokes that come through, little scraps of, if you're reading in English and you know certain Greek and Latin roots or certain Germanic or even Scandinavian roots, just from reading. You'll catch little things. The famous Norse tree of life, Yggdrasil, is mentioned as Yggdrasil at one point within the book. And little things like that occur. But it also, there are puns that we just aren't picking up because, as readers, because we don't speak all these languages. And so that can be a bit of a bear. There's sort of something for everybody in this book. I mentioned it's kind of like an encyclopedia in code. But because there's something for everybody, there might be a lot of pages where it feels like there's nothing for a particular reader. There were sometimes, I think particularly for me, it was kind of in the middle of the book where I was definitely I was getting jokes, but I wasn't necessarily feeling that like there was a lot of sense to be made of the nonsense, if you will. Now there is a plot, there is an overarching plot. We have, and we're told that right at the beginning, but again, it's in code. River run past even atoms from swerve of shore to bend of bay brings us back by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. HCE there, Howth Castle and environs, HCE, Humphrey Earwicker. That's going to be our main character, the great, big Mr. Finnegan, who's fallen and died, yet also could be asleep and dreaming. It's important to note that the title Finnegans Wake does not have an apostrophe. It is not the wake of Finnegan because he has died and everybody's there at the wake singing the song like in the famous little Irish song that Joyce was referencing. It's Finnegans Wake. The Finnegans can wake. They can wake from sleep. They can wake changed over and metamorphosed, which is a key aspect there in that first sentence. They can wake, in terms of this like resurrection. So there's a lot of ways that the Finnegans wake. Finnegan, the Finnegan of our book, the Finnegans of history, the Finnegans that are the Finnegans within the readers themselves can be waking. There's a lot going on. But that brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation. That's the other key aspect, is the famous Ricorso of Vico from, I believe it's the Renaissance, it might be later than the Renaissance, where there are the 4 different ages, the theocratic, aristocratic, democratic, and chaotic, and then it recirculates back. And that's, in a sense, it's important to note, there are 4 books, there are 4 cardinal directions, the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all the 4 sort of regions of Ireland that Joyce is referencing, all of those represent this 4 stage cycle, the 4 seasons of the year, which will be critical at the end. And so that's happening. And that's really what's the book is really exploring. It's not really about Earwicker. Yes, he's there. We have his wife, Anna Olivia Pluribus, ALP. Those initials, HC and ALP, recur throughout the book. You see them like almost like the aspects of a Greek chorus, the way they drop in, and it's sort of this clue of like to hook you back in and remind the reader, yes, this is happening. Remember, there's these 2 sort of archetypal characters that we're exploring throughout the book. They have then 3 children, a daughter and 2 twin sons, Shem and Sean, Kevin and Jerry, James Joyce and Stanislaw Joyce. That's very much happening throughout the book. Earwicker has committed some crime. There's a letter that proves it. People maybe have spread rumors about the letter or the crime. Earwicker he does confess to the crime by denying that he's done it without having been accused. And it's pretty bad. Like when you actually get underneath what is going on with that Earwicker character, that's a bad dude. I think that needs to be mentioned. There are a couple of things within the book that do, I think, act as very troubling aspects once you get into the actual narrative and plot and themes. And underneath this just wild, cosmic universe of language and jokes and puns that are going on, Earwicker's committed a fairly awful crime, about as bad as it gets. And he's consumed by that to a large extent. And so when we have these different characters dreaming about memories of this totally unidealized father figure character who has committed a crime and has died, there's real guilt and a real sense of shame that comes with that. And that can be like gleaned through the text, I think. But as much as there are those moments that I sort of mentioned of like, hey, this can be fun, this can be interesting, there are also moments that are just absolutely baffling and confusing and tedious. So we get things like this. Here we go. Refrex the petty padre, wackling it out, a tumble to take, triteness to call thing into call of say is good, while you poor chiaroscuro, black and white paddinger, by this was a posterior prismically apostrophied and paralogically paralyzed, celestial from principalist of Iros Irismans, runabun pot before, for being time monk blinkers, time blinged, complementarily merc blankered in their neutralysis between the possible veriditude of the satyr and the probable irreberation of the saint, as my toprinquish to me wipen selfs, nosegates a handkerchief of synthetic chamois to him's hers, seeming such. Well, I got there at the end that we were wiping a nose with a handkerchief of synthetic chamois. But the rest of that paragraph is a mess. And we're going to experience aspects of that throughout the book. It's important to note that within dreams, as we have experienced in our own dreams, time doesn't have the same sense that it has in waking life. And that's actually a very interesting aspect of the human mind and human consciousness. And it's interesting to see a novelist go at this, joust with that windmill of trying to represent in a book for the mind of an awake reader, the Finnegan who's woken, this sense of dream reality, where time doesn't exist the way it does for us in our waking lives. We have that aspect of time dilation, that our perceptions of time are stretching what's happening in one sort of relativistic sense of time, and in another is different. And it's very explicit right from the start. Like, the Battle of Waterloo is fought in the wrong year. Napoleon defeats Wellington. That's just one of the real obvious signals that gets run up to let everybody know that this is a dream. There are other aspects where, as I had mentioned, sort of the idealized self or the unidealized self, the worst version of oneself, the most terrifying, nightmarish version of reality, can exist in that dream. That for one character, the entire life can be within the dream. For someone else, a second has gone by. And that sense occurs. And it's really, it can be interesting, in particular as a contrast with the way that so many other works, both in the tradition of the realist novels, across the 19th century in particular, but into the early 20th century, and then even in the tradition of the modernist novels, the realists were absolutely focused on what day is it, what time of year is it, what time of day is it, what's going on. Even in something like Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, there's that really fascinating aspect that she keeps bringing us back to the reality within that stream of consciousness by reminding us of the time of day. William Faulkner in The Sound and the Fury, in Quentin's chapter, as much of a sense of chaos and obsession that chapter seems to be, we have this sense of time and being trapped in time occurring across that day. And Finnegans Wake absolutely does not have that. We are all over the place because we can do that within a dream. And to a certain extent, I think it actually approximates some of our ideas around how perceptions of a multiverse could exist. Well, before many of those were conceived, the book, in its effort, in jousting at one windmill, perhaps knocks down a scarecrow on the way that he didn't realize was there. But the book does take us to a really interesting place towards the end, where we finally have spent some time with Anna Livia Plurabelle. And we have some really beautiful moments. Soft morning city, lisps, I am leafy speaking, faulty, all the nights have falled on to long my hair, not a sound falling. Listen, no wind, no word, only a leaf, just a leaf and then leaves. The woods are fond always, as were we their babes in, and robins and crows so. It is for me golden wending, unless away. Rise up, man of the hoofs. You have slept so long, or is it only so, Miss Leames? And so we have ALP sort of take on this aspect, talking about the leaves falling and bringing us back to that idea of the Ricorso, of the changing of the ages, of the changing of the seasons. And that in autumn the leaves fall from a tree, and we're going to see that on the final page, the final paragraph of this long, extended, 8-page final sort of thought that Anna Livia Plurabelle seems to be having, that we see this winter, but we know that it returns back to a new day, a new spring, perhaps a new person who won't commit the crimes Earwicker has committed. And so we go from that moment to this incredible little section at the end that closes out the book. But I'm loathing them that's here and all I doth, lonely in my loneness, for all their faults I am passing out. Oh, bitter ending, I'll slip away before they're up, they'll never see, nor know, nor miss me. And it's old and old, it's sad and old, it's sad and weary I go back to you, my cold father, my cold mad father, my cold mad fury father, till the near sight of the mere size of him, the moils and moils of it, moaning makes me sea salt sick, and I rush, my only, into your arms. I see them rising, save me from those terrible prongs. 2 more, 1, 2, more means more. So, Avil of all, my leaves have drifted from me. All but one clings still, I'll bear it on me, to remind me of life. So soft this morning ours, yes, carry me along, Teddy, like you done through the toy fair. If I seen him bearing down on me now under white-spread wings like he'd come from archangels, I'd sink, I'd die down over his feet, humbly-dumbly, only to wash up. Yes, tight. There's where, first, we pass through grass, be hush the bush, to wish a gull, gulls, far calls, coming far. End here, us then, Finnegan, take, bus a flea, me memory, till thousands thee lips, the keys to, given, away alone, alas, loved along the... And that's how the book ends, but we know that that sentence returns to River Run past Adam and Eve's, the Vicus Recorsing, Howth Castle and environs. But that moment where the tree has had its leaves fall in autumn and now it's in this winter of life, perhaps Anna Olivia Plurabelle, this is almost this final dream she'll have in life as she goes on this river and returns to the sea. And I never found any discussion around the symbolism of the river within Finnegans Wake. It is the river of sleep, the river of dreams, the river of life, all those things. But also this idea of going into the water, and then this Ricorso perhaps being a symbol of Christian baptism, and this idea of the baptism and the new life that springs from it. And Joyce had plenty of ironies and agonies with the church. But I think that there is this hopeful aspect to ALP, particularly with the idea that she's going to take this one leaf, that despite all these aspects of leaves that have fallen, perhaps there's one left, and that is perhaps the true leaf, that her true self that will be reborn and that will return. I choose to take an aspect of hope, the idea of the memory and the keys to this idea of like the keys to the kingdom, the keys to, again, sort of that symbol. I think is just interesting. So there's a lot to unpack in this book. I'm actually thinking of doing another video where I just sort of give 10 tips, 10 hints to exploring Finnegans Wake, just things that a reader might want to latch onto and be aware of. There are plenty of books that go into Finnegans Wake in great detail. There's like skeleton keys. There's books that have, because the book is intended to be printed with 628 pages for that 2π, like unit circle, full circle idea. There are books that can, if I understand it, have like references on each line of the page showing like this is the explanation for whatever's right here on page 87 or whatever. There's online versions of that. But Anthony Burgess's Read Joyce is probably the single most readable. I wasn't reading any of those skeleton keys or anything. I did go and dip into Read Joyce once I was about 480 pages into this, just to kind of familiarize myself with some of what I thought was going on. I think it's difficult to sense those aspects of narrative, and so I would be very cautious about recommending the book. But if you want to go for it, it's not nearly as inaccessible as it seems. And there are plenty of jokes in here. There's also a lot of food that perhaps gets left on the oven a little bit too long. So this was interesting to be reading. I had mentioned, of course, Virginia Woolf and Mrs. Dalloway, and which is just one of my favorite books, and a book that I can return to, and perhaps I'll return to River Run with ALP and HCE. Woolf had some choice words about Joyce. In one letter she refers to him, this is from the period of Ulysses, but she says, I am now reading Joyce, and my impression after 200 out of 700 pages is that the poor young man has only got the dregs of a mind, compared even with George Meredith. I mean, if you could weigh the meaning on Joyce's pages, it would be about 10 times as light as on Henry James. That's not a slam, in my opinion, with my opinions on Henri James. She also refers to If you read Mr. Joyce and Mr. Eliot, you will be struck by the indecency of the one and the obscurity of the other. Mr. Joyce's indecency in Ulysses seems to me the conscious and calculated indecency of a desperate man who feels that in order to breathe he must break the windows. At moments, when the window is broken, he is magnificent. But what a waste of energy. So, shots fired from Virginia Woolf. I think two writers who certainly inspired Joyce to a large degree are Jonathan Swift. There's a whole bit around the Mooks and Gripes basically being Joyce's version of the Battle of the Books, and Lewis Carroll. There's the nonsense language, the language that seems to be nonsense but symbolically could be something else. Certainly present. Ulysses. I think there's a way to read. Some people want to think of Finnegans Wake as the dream that occurs at the end of the day in Ulysses when everybody falls asleep. I don't get that sense in the same way. I think Finnegans Wake feels less autobiographical than the other works that Joyce wrote. I think he perhaps mastered a sense of himself within Finnegans Wake, or within Ulysses, and was then free to experiment more in Finnegans Wake. Rabelais, the just madhouse that he wants to create, where he's, I should say mirror house, where he's just making as many linguistic puns and jokes as he can, some of which are like wildly inappropriate. In terms of writers who I was sort of reminded of and who I think were explicitly inspired by Joyce, I thought of Flann O'Brien, At Swim Two Birds, The Third Policeman, the Dalkey Archive. I'm going to be reading some O'Brien in 2022, so that should be fun. I think Samuel Beckett kind of went the other way and decided that if James Joyce is going to do everything in sprawl language and try to get the whole universe, Beckett wanted to shrink it to a single atom. And cut away everything and shrink it down to this one moment. And I'll probably be giving one of Beckett's novels, Malloy, a shot next year. And then I don't think it's possible to discuss Finnegans Wake now without bringing up Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann, which I'm hoping to get to in 2022 as well. Ellmann was the daughter, I believe, of Richard Ellmann, who wrote the massive biography of James Joyce. So there's a sense there of almost a spiritual kinship to Joyce that I think is present. And there are aspects of how just inscrutable and nonsensical the book can feel that reminded me of when I was reading J.R. by William Gaddis. It's been like 12, 13 years since I read this. I was coaching track at the time. I would read it at meets. And then the last work I was reminded of was Mulholland Drive by David Lynch, and the way that that explores dreams and nightmares and sort of idealized realities and nightmarish realities. Idealized dream realities and then nightmarish real realities. So this is Finnegans Wake, and I really am, I will try to do that other video. And so let me know how far you've made it into this monster piece. I'm not going to call it a masterpiece. And again, I hope everybody's having a great week. I'll see you later. Thanks.